Hello and welcome to Making Media Now, the Filmmakers Collaborative podcast. I'm your host, Michael Azevedo. My guest on this episode is writer and director Andrew Goldberg, whose documentary, White with Fear, will premiere on PBS on March 24th. Told by operatives in the rooms where it happened, White with Fear is an explosive deep dive into the decades-long quest by America's conservative political machine to amass power by exploiting racial fault lines and stoking narratives of white victimization. The documentary examines how some American conservatives and political operatives have successfully weaponized racism and fear for decades and uncovers the real-world consequences of deploying tactics that seek to demonize immigrants, spread Islamophobia, and devise a strategic media campaign of racist rhetoric that has real-world consequences. The film recently earned a Writers Guild Award nomination. Here's the trailer.
Black Lives Matter is a Marxist organization.
How many innocent Americans have these people hurt?
Fear is the best motivator.
When Mexico sends its people,
they're invading, they're murdering, they're raping.
How many moms are grieving because of our sanctuary cities?
You don't have to talk about politics, you have to talk about how the brain of the human works.
Critical race theory is poison.
These people hate white people?
There is now a white fear industrial complex.
Mexican criminals, Black Lives Matter terrorists,
radical Islamic terrorism.
Where many people get very rich and very powerful by telling white America that they are under constant assault.
They want to steal your liberty, your freedom.
I want surveillance of certain mosques.
This is strategic racism.
We will never, ever surrender to the woke mob.
Tapping into white grievance and anxiety, and then exploiting and creating more and more of it.
Chaos in the streets, in the schools.
Gripped by professional anarchists.
This country is being invaded.
And when you're scared, you fight back.
We want our country back!
White supremacist protests turned violent.
Panic in El Paso this morning.
Motivated by anti-immigrant hatred.
13 people were shot, 10 of them killed.
He specifically targeted black people.
We're under fire.
White with Fear will stream simultaneously with broadcast and be available on all station-branded PBS platforms. Andrew Goldberg has directed 14 primetime documentaries. His work has appeared on major networks on every continent and has been supported by more than 250 foundations, corporations, and major donors around the world. Making Media Now is sponsored by Filmmakers Collaborative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting media makers from across the creative spectrum. From providing fiscal sponsorship to presenting an array of informative and educational programs, Filmmakers Collaborative supports creatives at every step in their journey. To learn more, visit filmmakerscollab.org. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please do give it a like, a share, a follow. Now on to my conversation with Andrew Goldberg. Andrew Goldberg, welcome to Making Media Now.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
We are here to talk about your film White with Fear, which will premiere on March the 24th on PBS. So it's the broadcast premiere date and also effective that date. PBS will also be streaming the film simultaneously with the broadcast. So the film will be available on all station-branded PBS platforms, including at pbs.org. So plenty of opportunity to catch this film on multiple platforms. So, Andrew, the first thing I wanted to chat with you about was how it feels to be releasing this film, White with Fear, which is a examination of how some American conservatives and political operatives have essentially successfully weaponized racism and fear for decades. I wanted to get your sense of how it feels to be releasing this film in this political climate and also in this media climate where there doesn't seem to be a lot of willingness to maybe examine the roots and the reasons we are where we are.
Well, it's a good question. When we started this film, we were on the heels of the rise of Black Lives Matter as a sort of social movement. I mean, it changed from something that was sort of at the grassroots level to something that was really a national conversation. and in the aftermath of the shooting of George Floyd. And so you had a country at the time, we're talking about, 4 years ago or so, something like that, 5 years ago, when that was almost welcome. Like everybody wanted to talk about, what's going on in American politics such that, we are defining who the white people are and what role white people are playing in this sort of environment. Are white people is there systemic racism? Are white people enjoying privilege? Is there and what we've seen in the last couple of years is that particularly under the Trump administration is that we've pulled back from all of that.
Mm-hmm.
DEI departments are being closed all around the country. Businesses and organizations that were really sort of forward thinking with their DEI initiatives and what have you are now saying that they're not doing that anymore. They're laying off their DEI executives and the people that oversaw those departments. If they're not using the words DEI, they're using some variant of the same idea. But none of that has changed the fact that the political machine in this country, and in our case, the way the film looks at primarily the conservative political Republican machine, believes strongly, and in fact, I would argue stronger than ever, that scaring white voters on issues of race about people of color is central to maintaining their grip on power. And that has not changed at all, despite the fact that that we've seen a shift in the populace, a shift in the conversation. The mechanism is still in gear, and if anything, I would argue that it's accelerated into high gear. So my film being released now, I don't think this could be a better time. I mean, I thought a few years ago it was a good time, although the market was saturated with this stuff. Now I feel like the market is not saturated with this stuff, and it's worse than ever. The other thing about our film is that it's not a lefty film. It's not a anti-Trump film. It's not a pro-diversity film. It's a real sort of clinical journalistic look at operatives and who share what they do. I mean, most of the people in this film, overwhelming majority, I would think it's the majority, I've never actually counted, the majority of the people in this film are either Republicans who do this or Republicans who did this. It's not a bunch of lefties pointing at Republicans and whining, which is what a lot of the media around this issue is. It's one side moaning and bitching about the other side. We don't have any of that in this film. I mean, it's basically a film of perpetrators and actors. I don't mean Hollywood actors. I mean actors who do things.
Sure.
Talking about what they did and do to scare white people, and that's I think makes our film pretty unique in that regard.
Yeah, and among those Republicans or former Republicans, one of them is Stuart Stevens, who was the architect of numerous very successful Republican campaigns. So if there's anybody that knows these tactics from the inside perspective, it's a guy such as Stuart Stevens. And I would also add to that Tim Miller, who worked on the Jeb Bush campaign and several others, and now, of course, runs the Bulwark Enterprise as a one of the original anti-Trumpers, I guess. But your film picks up looking at the 1968 campaign of Richard Nixon. Now, Nixon obviously isn't the first politician that's going to use race as a wedge issue. But what was it about the 68 campaign that Nixon ran and the way he ran it that made it feel for you like this is a good starting off point?
There were people, that's a good question too. There were people before listen, using race as a strategy, I would imagine that goes back thousands of years. I mean, I whether it's not necessarily race, but casting ethnic groups and communities as evil as a way to win hearts and minds is not a new phenomenon. Obviously, it was central to Adolf Hitler's rise to power. I mean, it's not novel. But what Nixon does is something different. You have even right before him, you have guys like Barry Goldwater and Wallace who are using race as part of their campaigns. Nixon is different. Nixon makes it a scientific organizing principle, right? He is the first one to hire experts who do data studies, to come up with this, to frame things, to issue memos about it and conversations. He hires Kevin Phillips, who's like a complicated strategy guy who writes a book about it. And the idea is if we can divide the country in half, and we can choose. We can win the bigger half, which at that time was by far white people. Now white people don't necessarily really make the bigger half anymore, but back then they totally did in the 60s.
Right.
You know, you have a guy like Wallace who runs before him for one election. I don't remember what the election was, and Wallace doesn't win this election because the guy that runs against him is a bigger racist than he is.
Yeah, right.
And so
George Wallace, you're speaking of.
George Wallace, sorry. Yeah, George Wallace, a huge racist. And he says his campaign manager in an interview years later said, I'm not going to use the word, I'm going to say N-word. He says, we got out N-worded by the other guy, and we're never going to be out N-worded again. Yeah. In other words, that guy was a bigger racist than even us. And of course, this leads to Wallace's people, thinking, how can we even become bigger racists? But that was the end of their strategy. Nixon hires Pat Buchanan. And I wrote to Pat Buchanan, like several times. And I was like, come on, Pat. I was acting like we were old buddies. Guy, he's not a friendly guy, but he said, your missives are arriving. He was referring to my letters. Your missives are arriving, but I won't do an interview. But he says, yes, we did work hard to crack and splinter the Democratic Party in the 1960s. He didn't say along racial lines, but there are some memos out there. They're not in the film, but there's some memos out there that where you can get your hands on them, where they talk about, they wanted to get the Democrats to run a black vice president, because they knew that if there was a black vice presidential candidate, it would scare the heck out of white people who would flock to the Republican Party.
Yeah, and the Nixon approach kind of distinguishes itself too, because it seemed to be that they knew, well, listen, we're not going to win if we just get the pure, proud racist necessarily. But Nixon, in his appeal to what he referred to as the silent majority, seemed to have, let's say, the analytics where they could tap into what began to be called white anxiety. How would you define white anxiety, and how do you see it as a driver of maybe, what would eventually go on to become the Tea Party and then MAGA?
The film opens, it doesn't exactly open, but near the top of the film, I have from the 1960s, a group of white grandmothers and mothers in suburban Detroit. Now, suburban Detroit in the 1960s these are white cities. These are white cities, but these are women who are seeing the news talk about everything from race, I don't want to say riots, but race conflicts, crime, issues around busing, which was about integrating people. And they're getting images fed to their TV every night that they need to be scared. Yeah. This is a kind of a manufactured fear, as Ian Haney Lopez calls it in the film. It's strategic racism. Yeah. So white anxiety is something that is there because somebody decided to put it there. I mean, every human being is a little anxious about something. Yeah. You can steer it and you can control it and you can manipulate it. So Nixon recognizes that he can, lean into it. So these grandmothers that I'm talking about have a bunch of handguns and they're going to a shooting range. And the guy says to them, listen, he doesn't call them grandmothers, but listen, ladies, you take these guns and the little manuals about how to use the guns and put them next to your cookbooks. I mean, it was so sexist, right? This idea that, of course, they're women in a home. They must have cookbooks. Put them next to your cookbooks to teach you how to use these guns, because you're going to need to protect yourself for when the black people come from Detroit to the suburbs to get you.
Yes.
Now, when do black people... First of all, the notion that black people were dangerous was just completely preposterous and overblown. And then the notion that they were going to leave the city of Detroit to suburbs to get them. And then that these little old ladies needed a gun. Well, talk about white anxiety. All Nixon has to do is walk in and say a couple of things. The fear that's gripping us, he says. The fear. And they voted for him.
Well, that introduces the whole concept of the dog whistles. And so, Nixon doesn't have to say more than the fear that's gripping us. That's a dog whistle. We know what he's saying. And in the last 40 years or so, anytime a politician starts talking about urban areas, they're coming from the urban areas. That's a dog whistle. That's become code for inner city blacks. And one of the architects of these semantic dog whistles that is associated with the Nixon administration is a guy named Roger Ailes. Tell us about how instrumental he was in shaping Nixon's messaging around that, and of course, where he went on.
I'm not sure that there is a more instrumental character in the shift in the polarization of American politics than Roger Ailes. He may be the single most influential person. There were guys, and I'll talk about Roger in a second, but there were people like Rush Limbaugh. Years ago when I was in 90, I can tell you when it was, in like 92, I was in graduate school and getting an MBA, and my focus was marketing, and I wanted to work in media. And I didn't know. I knew I wanted to work in media, but I was getting an MBA, so all I could think I could do is work in the marketing department of a media company. Okay, whatever. I met with the team that created the Rush Limbaugh show, and they explained to me that they were looking for a show that was local, that they could take national and make money. And they said that they look at the ratings for these radio shows, and the biggest hump they'd ever seen in their life was a midday hump from 12 to 3, a 3-hour hump where the ratings were, let's say I'm just making up a number. Let's say they were at 2, and then they spiked to 50 and then went back down to 2. He said, I've never seen a spike like this in midday ratings in my life. And it was Rush Limbaugh who was on a show in Sacramento. This is a guy that had made a show that was entirely based around resentment and anger and being, pissed off at the Democratic Party because you, the Republican, and he spoke in, he used every dog whistle. You, the Republican, the white man, largely, were being ripped off and exploited. Okay. But he was just one guy, and that was just one show. Roger Ailes took this concept. He recognized the power of this concept to help get Richard Nixon elected. He recognized it with Rush Limbaugh, and he put it all together to create Fox News. Now, Rupert Murdoch was the brainchild behind Fox News, but whoever thought Fox News would be as successful as it is? There are a lot of conservative media outlets before Fox News, and there have been a lot of them since. Nothing has been as successful and as powerful at tapping into the grievance machine in this unbelievably sophisticated and nuanced way. As brash and obnoxious as Roger Ailes may have been in public, and I don't know him, I didn't meet him, but as awful a person as he is described as being by the women around him, and I have no doubt that he was appalling based on what I've heard. I have no doubt. He had a sensitivity and an understanding for the human psyche and how to control and manipulate people, how to find the most delicate way to touch a person's feelings.
Yeah.
That he could shift the paradigm in this country in a way that has never been done before. That you've not seen anything like that before. I think maybe Ronald Reagan did it with his election. Ronald Reagan won, I don't even remember how many states, so many of them. That was a remarkable thing.
Yeah, and particularly in 84.
News, we have Fox News. We have Fox News, which continues to dominate this cultural zeitgeist in a way that nothing else does. I mean, MSNBC tries hard to be a counterweight to it, but it does not have the punch. It doesn't have the loyalty. People are not as connected to it. And Roger Ailes was, in a certain way, I think, one of the most capable and sophisticated media geniuses that this country has ever seen. And I say that being repulsed by what he did.
Sure.
Because even if you believe in conservative politics, I'm sorry to keep going on this so long, but even if you believe in conservative politics, you don't need to manipulate people in a way that causes so much harm. And that's where he and I break.
Yeah, and that pairing of Ailes, and then you bring up Rush Limbaugh. I mean, Limbaugh was the savior of AM radio. Around the time of his rise, AM radio was losing listeners in droves to the FM band because it was higher quality signal, and you had stereo, and Limbaugh was part of the daytime talent that made AM radio managers and owners say, wait a minute, you know what we can sell? We can sell grievance. We can sell agitation. So all of those guys, those long haul truckers, or those people that were trapped in commuter traffic, they had a voice for them. And it's a very interesting pairing. You've got Ailes on television, and you've got Limbaugh and his ilk on AM radio.
Yeah, well, so when I was, prior to going to college, between high school and college, I worked for 2 years in a kind of financial sales. I just thought maybe I won't go to college. I'll just sell financial instruments. And we used to advertise on the radio. And when I was in college, I decided to make money by going back to those financial services guys and showing them how they could use the radio to sell things. And all anybody wanted to buy was Rush. We would buy. You could buy. There was Rush, and at first, when the sales agents from the radio stations would talk to me about did I want to buy Rush, I thought they meant Rush Hour. I didn't know. I didn't put two and two together, because when I had first gotten into it, Rush wasn't a national phenomenon. By the time I get there, he's everywhere. He's syndicated all over the country. And so you could buy before Rush, and the numbers now, Rush got so big that if you were the show before Rush, your numbers were higher because people were waiting for Rush. And then if you were the show, if Rush was your lead-in, your numbers were huge. It was like a tidal wave that hits the beach. I mean, even if there's nothing going on, it's going to hit hard. And so the hour after Rush was huge, even though the guy may have been terrible. Yeah. They would have terrible shows on, but they would benefit from the lead-in. And so, but buying Rush, sometimes we couldn't afford Rush, so we would buy Rush adjacent, and that was where they would make the most money.
So we mentioned a couple of the former Republicans that show up in your film, Stuart Stevens and Tim Miller among them, but you also speak with Steve Bannon and a guy named Rick Gates, who I'm sure a lot of people know who Bannon is. Rick Gates, you may remember his name, listeners may remember his name from Trump's first term, but I found his interview to be I have to say, almost the most jarring of everyone you spoke to, because he seemed so comfortable with a certain amorality. And essentially, in promoting a candidate, he was going to say whatever was necessary to say to the electorate that was going to win them over to his particular candidate. So if that was tapping into racial fear or tapping into, phony statistics around immigrant crime, what was your take in your conversation with him around the way he approached politics from such a, let's just say, a morality-free zone?
It's a good question. I got to know Rick a little bit. He's a very nice guy. Which is not something I can say for everybody that that I met while making this film and other films. I don't know that he is willingly putting forth any fake crime statistics. In other words, I think that when Rick, and I'm only speaking for Rick, when Rick comes forward with a crime statistic, he believes that that's a real statistic. In other words, I didn't see Rick. What I had a problem with was Rick's willingness to participate in the overall machine.
Sure.
And I said to him, "Are you comfortable with what I described as a white resentment model?" I said, "Were you comfortable with it?" And he said, "Yes." He's comfortable with the architecture. I wouldn't describe him as a particularly dishonest person, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and I'm not. In fact, it was his honesty that I found most jarring.
That's exactly. No, you nailed it, Michael. That's exactly what I was going to say. I think that he was very honest. He's very forthcoming. I think there are operatives in politics who will use fake data statistics. I think that, and if they don't use an exact fake data point, they'll present it in a way that's manipulative. And so, for example, the way Stephen Miller talks repeatedly, the way a lot of guys on some Fox shows do talk about the way they frame it to either leave you to not know what the answer is or to just present it as if it's much worse than it is in terms of, for example, migrant crime.
Yeah.
Right. There's the number of actual crimes committed by migrants is much lower than committed by people who are born and live here. Those numbers are lower, and yet they continue to say, that there are these huge numbers of people from other countries that are committing crimes, and that is just, to me, dishonest and manipulative. That's not what I think Rick Gates does. But what I think Rick Gates does is he participates in the overall machine. Mm-hmm. I feel like the overall machine where you prey on people's fears and tell them that they have to be afraid of black and brown people in this country or they won't be safe. And that the only solution to that is to vote for my candidate is a horribly manipulative architecture. And that is the part that I challenged Rick on in my interview, and that he was comfortable with. At least that was how it struck me. I mean, but I didn't sort of see him as the kind of, and I encourage people to watch the film, to see him as the kind of dishonest dealer that I think a lot of these guys are, like Miller. I mean, Miller is up there talking all the time about
Stephen Miller.
Sorry, talking all the time about this idea somehow or another, just by being white in America, you're at risk of some migrant, using their language, hurting you. And that's just not factually accurate.
Yeah.
And yet people are led to the things that when I would go to, Republican events or what have you during the various elections, that we produced this film over 2 or 3 years, and we went to a number of events, somewhere before elections, whatever, not midterms, primaries, things like that, just whatever. And listening to this stuff that people had in their heads, how distorted and bizarre their worldviews were based on the nonsense that they're being fed. That was a problem. But what is so interesting about Rick is that he loves to talk about, he'll tell you all this stuff. It's not a secret to him. Or to Steve Bannon. All these Republicans like to talk about what they do. They'll talk.
Yeah, the Miller, the Steve Bannons and the Rick Gates characters, they strike me as there's a sporting element to this. Like this is sort of a sport, and they're on a particular team. And whatever it takes to help that particular team win, they're all in for it. I think as Stephen Miller comes across, and you really tap into this in your film in terms of, trying to shed a little bit of light on what may have been certain resident personality qualities that he had by talking to someone who was it in high school with them?
Yeah, we spoke to Kesha Ram, was a state representative in Vermont. I don't know that she is now, and she grew up with him, and she told the story, according to her, that he said to someone she knew who was brown skinned that he couldn't be his friend anymore because he was this kind of ethnic group or something like that. I don't remember the exact story. But I mean, to me, that was just bizarre that almost is like the kind of thing Dave Chappelle would do as a joke. I mean, right. And yet this is something that the guy really went and did. I mean, I look at Miller again. I don't know Miller, so I'm only speaking off of my conclusions that I draw from what I've seen.
Right.
But he strikes me as a true believer. I mean, I think a lot of these people in the administration, are just coming up with strategic and clever ways to amass power. I don't know if Trump, from what I can, this is just me drawing a conclusion again based on what I see. I don't know if Trump hates half the ethnic groups that he goes after. I don't know how he feels about any of them. But I know that he's a great opportunist. I mean, if let's hate that group, Trump will lean into that. But right. Miller, I feel like he hired Miller because Miller really believes this stuff. That's my sense. Of course, I can't, I don't want to be quoted for saying he believes anything because I don't know the guy.
Sure.
I met him. I did get his email, his phone number, and I texted him. I kept, I was like, come on, interview with me. No answer from Stephen Miller. But I still
he didn't call you right back when he found out you were making a documentary for PBS?
No, he didn't. But I do still have his cell phone number and Tucker's. Tucker also said no. I tried to get him.
Tucker of the Great Replacement Theory. So while we're on Tucker, let's shed a little bit of light on how far he's gone with the Great Replacement Theory, and for listeners who aren't clear on what that purports, bring us up to speed.
Well, I mean, the Great Replacement Theory is this idea that they're trying to replace the white population with brown Americans who will vote Democrat,
right.
And that it's ultimately, I mean, it's unclear to me. I've never quite understood this theory because it's a kind of an absurd theory, but that there's a planned structure. And by the way, now let's really get into it. It's a planned idea that is being masterminded by Jews. I mean, we can't miss that part of it, okay? And why it's being masterminded by Jews is very interesting because the belief that harkens back to this idea that the Jews were behind the race mixing of the 1960s. If you dig into the civil rights movement, the idea was that and this is a really clever point that's made by Eric Ward, who's a really smart, forward thinker in African American equal rights and activism right now. And Eric Ward explains to me in another film I made that how could the civil rights movement have happened? The black people could not have been smart enough. This is what they said. It's not what I'm saying. This is what they said.
Sure.
There had to be a secret force, and the secret force was the Jew. So we went back in another film I made and we looked at the marches against the civil rights movement. We looked at the marches of the people who opposed the civil rights movement. And they have these signs that say the Jews are behind race mixing. The Jews are the ones who want whites and blacks to be together. So now you fast forward to today, the Great Replacement Theory, bring in brown people, okay? bring in brown people to replace the white people. And what will that do? Number one, it'll make America brown, which is what all those liberals want. And number two, it'll stop us white people from being able to win elections, which is also what those liberals want. Now, how do we know that they really believe Jews are behind it? Let's go to Pittsburgh at the mass murder at the Tree of Life Synagogue. And what did the guy say? He shot a bunch of Jews and he said, I have to kill these Jews because they're the ones behind the immigrants coming in to America.
Yep.
And he said, the immigrants coming into America are slaughtering my people. Right. In other words, he believed that brown people are coming in to kill white people. It is such a conspiratorial pile of garbage. Sure. But this is the idea. Let's walk through this. The white people in this country are at risk from brown people coming across the border from Mexico. They want to kill them. They want to take their political power. They want to take their jobs. It's being masterminded by Jews. We have to kill the Jews and we have to stop the black and brown people. What is this whole thing called? The replacement theory. We're replacing the whites. And this is why when you go to the march at Charlottesville, that crazy march, they chanted, you will not replace us, white people, and Jews will not replace us.
Yes, yes.
Meaning white people and Jews will not be in charge of getting us replaced. It's the whole thing is so absurd. Now, let's be honest. On the other side, are there Democrats who probably say, you know what? If we get enough brown people in here, we probably will win some elections.
Sure,
those
it's
people,
politics.
Those people exist. Those people do exist. Yeah. Let's not act like they don't, because to act like one party is pure, the other party is pure, that's where I think we lose it. And that's central to this polarization. So, of course, yes, there are plenty of Democrats who welcome immigrants to come over the border because they know that they get all the things that immigrants bring.
Right.
But is this a grand replacement theory to replace the white populace by this secret cabal of Jews? It's so absurd. By the way, they've also named George Soros as its leader. I mean, it's so bizarre and so toxic and so sick. And this whole thing that I've just explained, this whole perverse, sick, toxic, dysfunctional nonsense is put forward by Republican political operatives like Tucker Carlson. That's the problem with this stuff, because people end up dead. People end up killed. People get their families torn in half at the border. The whole thing is so destructive and damaging for us as a society. And it only leads to a cycle of more and more of this. Sorry for my long answer.
No, that's quite all right. And, Tucker Carlson, being his rise on Fox, and he certainly, folks don't even know, he once worked for MSNBC before he went to Fox.
He was at CNN too.
Yes, exactly, on Crossfire. And, before he became a populist on Fox. Now, Tucker Carlson is also from the Swanson frozen food empire. So he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. It might have been frozen from the frozen foods. And then, he became the spokesperson for the beleaguered white man. And so often during your film, a particular cartoon kept popping into my head. I'm sure you've seen the cartoon. It's three individuals, and it's a wealthy white guy hovering over a downtrodden white guy who's got a cookie on his plate. And next to the downtrodden white guy with the cookie is an immigrant or a black guy. The cartoon changes sometimes. And the rich guy is saying to the poor white guy, "Hey, this immigrant's trying to steal your cookie." When the fact of the matter is, the rich white guy is determining how many cookies the poor white guy is going to get, how much that cookie is going to cost, and the black guy or the immigrant is the handy scapegoat.
I've seen variants of this kind of thing, dozens of times. And I mean, I think that ideology is the wrong word. That framing is so central to how our system is really set up. And by the way, I should point out, first of all, I'm a journalist, so I don't really give up my sort of political view on this, but I'm not some lefty guy that's out sort of with a lefty agenda. I just witnessed what I thought was a very destructive act happening on the right side of the aisle.
Right.
And I'm the first to call that out. And, I'm also the first to call out what's happening on the left side of the aisle. For example, right now I'm working on a film where I'm looking at a very corrosive anti-Semitism that's emerging on the left side of the aisle. That's very, very dangerous and problematic. That isn't, quote, all about Israel. I'm very sort of willing as a reporter to look at things with the introspection and honesty that, I think would be refreshing if people could sort of come to terms with the fact that maybe things are happening in their own party that aren't good. I applaud Ted Cruz for calling out right now anti-Semitism in his party. He's pointing to Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson for the things that they're saying.
Yes.
That kind of let's look at our own is too rare. I would love to see let's look at our own happening on the right, on the left, in the middle, where we were all able to say, you know what? We're this party, we have this idea, but we made these mistakes. We're doing this. This is going too far, where we can own these things. You know, the unwillingness to stand up to Donald Trump when he does things that are problematic is surprising to me. Historically, the Republican Party would stand up to their leaders. They stood up to George Bush. They stood up to Reagan at times, not as much. You don't see that now. They stood up to Nixon. I mean, if Trump committed the same crimes as Nixon did now, the party wouldn't stand up to him. The party stood up to him Nixon back then. So this is a kind of this sort of diminishing introspection, diminishing self-awareness, or unwillingness to challenge it, I think leads to more polarization in this country. I don't know how you stop it. It's not something I could, journalists aren't, we're making no progress. And,
Well, you talk about looking at the world with a journalistic objectivity or as, much as anyone can muster. You're a journalist, but you're still a human and whatnot. But in your film, we also look at the ascendancy of the Tea Party movement, which theoretically was in response to the rollout of Obamacare. And how Republicans positioned Obamacare. But you don't have to have a dog in the fight necessarily to see that protesters, Tea Party protesters carrying signs depicting Obama as an ape or as a monkey. Why is that necessary to saying that you have hesitancy around the adoption of Obamacare? So that fusing of racism and a political perspective, it's rather disturbing that it's just right there on the surface to be tapped into.
Well, you go to those events. I did not go to any of those events, but you'd go to those events and you'd see those posters with Obama in these very extreme looking like a monkey or looking like an ape or dressed up like a king, which I guess maybe the king one, I'm sure there's something in there. I don't know. I haven't really dissected the king one, except that it was offensive. But, just Obama and presented in the most horrible ways that lean into these racial stereotypes, and no one was saying anything about them. They just sort of tolerated them, this sort of quiet indifference. Elie Wiesel, the Nobel Prize winning author and Holocaust survivor, said, you have to take sides because silence only helps the oppressor. Right. So, if I was, on one side of a political argument and someone joined me and said, yeah, I agree with you and let's be racist about it too, I would say, stop that. You can't roll that into the argument. And yet people were sort of very willing to do that. Right. And I thought that was deeply problematic. It became, racism was such a through line of the anti-Obama criticisms, that it almost became impossible to differentiate the two. And the Tea Party, sure, I'm sure there were people in there who didn't like policies, and there were people in there who didn't like the economics of it. But they were so blinded by their hatred of this guy. I mean, the hatred of him was so it seems so misplaced. He largely governed from the center, and he didn't govern very much. He wasn't a particularly activist guy. You look at it, like Bush had rammed through so many things,
sure.
But yeah. Bush Jr., W. And Trump rams through so many things, so many policies and laws and just actions. There's so much going on. I didn't ever feel like Obama particularly did that much.
Well, and he took a lot of criticism from the left for that very reason. Like in the aftermath of the 08-09 financial meltdown, the Occupy Wall Street crew was very disappointed with Obama. And, the revisionist history, I guess, often says that Obama was in a tough place in the sense that he needed to, save the economy. But if he did anything that seemed punitive against the almost entirely white bankers and masters of the universe, and, who in a lot of ways position the world for that economic meltdown, he would be viewed and depicted as the angry black guy.
Well, I remember I never met Obama. My one of the interviews in this film who I didn't use was one of his close advisors, and I said to him, why did he never even pick up the race cause? He just didn't touch it. I mean, he did a little bit, but he didn't get into it at all. And he said because he wanted to be everyone's president.
Sure.
He wanted to be everyone's president. And this guy was a minister. He's a white guy. He's sort of a spiritual advisor to, I don't know what he was, frankly. But anyway, and I thought to myself, well, that was a noble effort by Obama to be everyone's president, and that's why he, I think, tried to govern from the center left. But he didn't. He became only the left's president, and then the left got frustrated with him because he didn't go far enough left.
Right.
So, I don't know. It was a remarkable breakthrough, but not a remarkable, to have him be president, but not a remarkable leadership, I thought. Maybe he should have done more for these causes. I don't know. That's a question for another day.
Yeah, and he's a bit of an enigma because, like I said, he had all of those countervailing forces that he had to contend with. The real operational day-to-day of being president, but being the first black president, and all of the hope that was associated with that, and then also all of the fear that was associated with that, or resentment that was associated with that by certain parties. But that inherent, or perhaps innate, or at least enduring aspect of the population, wherein race, if you can tap into the racism, it could be beneficial. Let's bring it up to 2024 in Springfield, Ohio, where they are eating the cats and the dogs, and they are the Haitian immigrants. Trump, as you mentioned before, there's no hard and fast evidence that Trump is, quote unquote, a racist. Is there a lot of circumstantial evidence that would seem to point to, if he can tap into a racist feeling, he's going to really put the pedal to the metal on that? What did the way he campaigned in 2024 reveal to you about the persistence of the white with fear phenomenon?
I thought that eating the cats and the dogs was so outrageous. I mean, it was such a new level. That when we finalized the film, the original theatrical version, I actually put that in to the PBS version. It was a slight edit because I thought it was I just sort of stuck it in. I just literally just dropped in the soundbite because it was so extreme, this idea that Haitians, I mean, it just plays into so many things. I will say another thing is that Trump does it so quickly and so naturally at that particular moment. Who even knows if he was thinking this is racist, this is going to work? He might have come in there with it planned. It might have popped into his head, but he had no trouble saying it. I mean, the guy.
Well, if you look at the debate that he used it in, he was going to use it, and if there hadn't been pushback, he totally would have used it. And the other split screen is Harris is actually laughing at it.
That's why I was chuckling just now. It's so preposterous. The other big thing there was when he went to the Black Journalists Association and he started talking about whether or not Kamala was an Indian or black, and that she suggested that she kept changing her ethnicity and this and that. I mean, the guy, he's really good. He's really good at sort of charming an audience and turning these kind of horribly bigoted ideas into humor in a way that, sort of creates a little safety bubble for him with his own people. Like, he would never just say he would never say the N-word like in a directed way, like, David Duke or something like that. Like he does it in this, it's just only he can do it. It'd be very interesting to see who runs after he does.
Right.
I think a lot of people think that he may be singular, and that after him we won't have to worry as much because the chance of another him running for president is unlikely, and that if anybody did win, how could they be so sort of all over the place? And I just said, well, imagine if Pete Hegseth ran for president, because he might, and I can't imagine that Pete Hegseth would be any less restrained or any less nuts. The guy really strikes me as kind of out there.
Well, in the aftermath of they're eating the cats and the dogs in Springfield, Ohio event, when the city officials in Springfield pushed back and made clear that wasn't the case, as if to prove the validity of the thesis of your film, J.D. Vance comes out and just literally says, if I have to create stories so that the media pays attention, I will. So essentially what he was saying is, if I have to create racist fear, we're going to do it.
I didn't know that Vance said that. That's very interesting.
That's a direct quote. If I have to create stories so that the American media actually pays attention, I'm going to do it.
Well, that's that. Listen, I mean, that's the fusion of entertainment and I'm going to read about that when we're done, because that's a fascinating and it fits with the way things have been going.
Right.
The campaign was not only concerning with the way Trump led it these issues, but also the way all of his various people that speak on his behalf talk about it. I mean, Tucker in particular, and I have a soundbite in the film. The way Tucker talked about Kamala was really concerning. I mean, really extreme racist language that Tucker used to describe her, and they really leaned into it. And I don't know that that's why they won. By the way, I just don't think she ran that strong of a campaign against Trump. And at some level, I feel like there's a limit to the power of these things. I mean, they have to be done strategically. You can't just sort of yell racist stuff. It's when they dig into the numbers, and when they start unpacking it, and when they start figuring out who their demographics are, who are their target markets, and shaping it and doing it. They're so good at it. I mean, it's really as Hillary Clinton, I interviewed Hillary Clinton, and she says in the film, Richard Nixon was simplistic compared to these people today.
Yeah, and Richard Nixon didn't have social media, and he didn't have a preconditioned coalition of voters that only lived in one particular media bubble, whether it's Fox News or whatever social media channels they were on. Now, a lot of folks in the aftermath of the 2024 election were pointing to Trump's increase in the percentage of vote from both the Hispanic population and the Black population. Now, he went from 8% of the Black vote in 2020 to 15% of the Black vote in 2024. So still a significant minority. But he only lost the Hispanic vote by 3%. In terms of comparison to Harris. If the Trump administration overread into that performance in shaping their immigration policy and the way it has been rolled out, vis-a-vis the actions of ICE.
The immigration is a very interesting question, because there are, and when you talk about Hispanic Americans voting, I think we need to break them up, because if you talk about Venezuelans, and I'm not talking about since he went and captured Maduro. I
hear you. Venezuelans in Florida.
Venezuelans and Cubans will generally you'll find, I don't want to speak about what they'll do. You'll find the data shows that they tend away from leftist politicians.
Sure.
So they're going to go right statistically, demographically, consistently.
Right.
So you're always going to see that. When you talk about immigrants, then you have to talk about from Central and South America, you're talking about people who, for many of them, want to maintain their ethnicity, and for many of them want to assimilate, become American, whatever that means to them. And in doing so, begin to view immigrants, especially as they get further and further away. My grandfather came here, my great-grandfather came here, begin to view immigrants suspiciously. And this is why you have, people who say, my grandfather came to this country, and I am a full-blown, hardworking American, and I own this business, and I'm working for myself. And to them, the message that the Republicans give, and I'm talking about Hispanic, for example, Latin American, the message that Trump gives resonates, because they don't want more immigrants coming from Mexico. They don't identify with the Mexican-American immigrant experience at all. That's something that their grandfather had. And so you see these demographic changes, and to the degree that Trump was able to grow people in these categories, he grew so many different groups. And in a certain sense, as a coalition builder, it's kind of remarkable. I mean, you have to think about, he brings in RFK to I mean, it's almost like a not Dilbert, but like a funnies cartoon, like, and RFK will be the head of things related to our health. And it's like, ha, 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 ha. No, let's actually do it. I mean, the whole thing reads like a giant comic strip. But by doing that, he brought in just a few more voters of people that hate vaccines and all the people that follow Jenny McCarthy, another anti-vaxxer.
Right.
That number right there, is it a few thousand? Is it a few million? Is it a few 100,000? He really was able to push a percent here, a percent there. And to the degree that he was able to do it with these different ethnic groups was strategic and clever. Now, since the election, his approval rating with what he's been doing with ICE has dropped among Hispanics significantly, more than it's dropped among his base.
Yes.
I'm not a journalist who's writing about, one part of the election. I happen to follow this stuff, so I know about it, but I don't follow it like Tim Miller does. Tim Miller once sent me an email about this video that he watched, and he said, I watched this so you don't have to. About some horrible video of some, disgusting racist thing that he was watching, some conversation, between two like white supremacists, something like that. I watch it so you don't have to. I don't follow it that closely, but
so do you think it was do you think that it was a misreading of the country's appetite for a certain type of racial othering, wherein did the Trump administration feel like, you know what, white America is going to be perfectly fine with the rounding up of 3,000 a day? I believe that was Stephen Miller's quota. 3,000 a day, brown folks, immigrants, regardless of how they are here or what their immigration status is, when in fact there has been pushback, particularly and most pointedly in Minnesota, largely because of the death of Renee Good and then Alex Preddy, but also pushback in Chicago, pushback in a lot of blue states, because this is where the immigration actions are really taking place the most stringently.
Yeah. But I also think he sometimes doesn't care. Sometimes he does things and then drops a bit and then it comes back. I think he's mindful of the midterms. I think he's also mindful of the fact that I don't know that he really cares about the midterms, or except to the fact that he'll lose majorities that could support him. I would imagine he'll tone it down. I mean, I think he's probably already got someone figuring out how soon he needs to tone it down before the midterms, and then he'll ramp it back up again. I don't believe that Trump is that ideological. So I don't think that he's that married to the idea of deporting immigrants. I think he does it because the people that voted for him, some of them wanted it. Some people say they want things and then you give it to them and they're like, oh, I don't actually want that. That's not actually
exactly right.
That's and he's done it with a broadsword, not a surgical knife. So it's become quite ugly.
Yeah.
But yeah, of course it was a misread. I was watching Bill Maher, and Bill Maher was saying, like, I think you're going to get your ass handed to you at the midterms, and it's to some Republican. And the guy kind of like chuckled a little bit. I mean, this is not a winning strategy, so I'm not sure why he does it. But the guy's also a magician. I mean, he does things that make no sense that no one else could do. What he does is, I used to have this friend growing up, and we were single in high school. Nervous, insecure kids, and this friend of mine would walk up to women and walk away with their phone number in a way. I said to my friend, well, should we be able? We were, single, 16 years old. And my friend said to me, no, what Tom does, his name was Evan Thomas Tucker. He said, what Tom does cannot be duplicated. It cannot be duplicated, so don't do it. He just had some way of doing it. And I feel like in a certain sense, at this, on the one hand, I think we could get someone just as sort of unhinged as Trump in office, but I don't know that we'll ever get someone for a while who can do such incredibly unpopular things and still be liked.
Yeah, so the invisible savior around that is a guy named Mark Burnett, who a lot of people often forget that if it weren't for Mark Burnett insisting to the tens of millions of people each week by way of The Apprentice reality show that this guy who had filed for bankruptcy 6 times was a business genius, that was a stronghold. That was essentially the assertion of a brand that Trump has never lost. Even right. when you heard potential voters in 2024 still insisting that he's a business guy, he knows how to get this done. Didn't matter if you had oceans of data that suggested otherwise.
I interviewed for this film Asif Mandvi, and I'm not sure if he's wearing the hat in the interview, but Asif Mandvi showed up for the interview with a hat that said facts. and I bought the hat.
Yeah.
And I just saw a picture of it like 2 days ago. I hadn't seen the hat in a couple of years because it was so ugly on me. It was like this big, giant, weird shape. The guys that made the hat had a great idea, but poor execution. But I will give Mark Burnett, first of all, Mark Burnett's a great producer. I don't know him, but I will give him credit for that. But I also feel like the fact that Trump's had a bad business record is irrelevant to anybody. They've decided he has a good business record.
Exactly.
And so the facts don't even matter.
Right.
You know, it's like, you know, I sat with a woman who I had lunch with a woman who is a very successful businesswoman. And she said she was all in for Trump. And I said, does it bother you, you know, about the women and the accusations? And my response, the response I expected was, well, you know, I don't like it, but I'm willing to live with it because I believe in what he's doing politically. Okay, you can like a politician if they do terrible. That's not what she said to me. She said to me, no, those women are all lying.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, I don't know anything because I didn't talk to any of these women. I do know one of the lawyers for one of them who I've talked to about it briefly, but I don't believe that all the women accusing Trump of these horrible sexual, you know, things are lying. I just don't believe it. I think those women are telling the truth, or at least most of them are, if not all of them. Okay, to simply say to me, I'm talking about a very, very successful businesswoman. She's worth hundreds of millions of dollars for an extremely high profile. It's a very well-known woman. There's no chance I'm going to say her name. But the notion that someone so intelligent was voting for this guy, and her handling of the women question was that they were simply liars. How can you have that kind of mental event in your brain where you simply deny something that is so just sitting in front of you? It's like, I remember, you know, arguing with someone about some word, and he said, well, then the dictionary is wrong. And I was like, sure. The dictionary is wrong? What are you talking about? It's, you know, like the definition of the word chicken or something like that. No, the dictionary is incorrect. But the dictionary is not incorrect. And all these women are not liars, but they've decided that they will completely rewrite history and facts, a la George Orwell 1984, in order to make themselves feel comfortable with this guy. And, you know, it's like that. I remember I saw in some movie once, some guy said something and the woman says to him, he says some, you know, nonsensical lie. And she says, whatever gets you through the night.
Whatever gets you through the night.
I love that phrase. Whatever gets you through the night.
Yeah, you can make yourself comfortable with what Kelly and Conway would refer to as alternative facts.
Alternative facts.
You've got yours and they've got theirs. So back to your film, White with Fear. When we leave the film, the power of the ability to create a portion of the electorate or the population that is white with fear has not been diminished. And is it your feeling that the more informed people are around the nature of this manipulation, the greater the odds are that it will become less effective? Or is there something in the hardwiring of humans that we need to find an other? And usually, because we're simple mammals, we base that other on creatures that don't look like us. Their skin is a different color. Is that a hurdle that is surmountable?
I have yet to find any situation where ethnic groups or different other groups get along together for a very long time. There's always these exceptions to the rule. I think it's very much built into our, you know, our way of thinking. I was watching these two, like some nature show, and I think it was like a muskox or something like that. who even knows what, you know, muskox? And they were slamming each other into each other's heads. And I thought, well, there we go. Now, we're not muskox. We like to think that we're some sort of higher order, you know, oh, we're godly, you know, there's a God and he chose us. And I'm sort of like, yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, I don't know if he chose us, but you know, we are at some level as simple as a couple of muskox slamming their heads into each other, you know, and it's like, if the muskox wins, it will get the women and children of the other muskox. And I was like, there's Stephen Miller, you know, like it's just a muskox slamming his head into another one. I mean, we are so simplistic in the way, in our drives, our biological drives are so like visceral and not higher ordered and not sophisticated. I don't think that we learn lessons. I think all the democracies of the world right now are struggling to maintain. It was this great idea that we all started a couple of 250 years ago, us and France and a lot of European countries and some Asian countries and some African countries, but it's being challenged and it's being pushed to its limits. And whether or not it will survive, I mean, I've been studying this stuff. I was a history major in college, and I've made films about it for 30 years. And wish I could be more optimistic. I'm tying democracy with this issue because I think the two go hand in hand. America was a great experiment. It was a great multicultural idea, and I really want it to work. I want to believe that it can. And then I sort of have this, I don't know if it's a cognitive dissonance. Anyway, I sort of like run into the facts, and I can't get around it. You look at Adolf Hitler, who is this idea, and it's extreme, right? It's the most extreme example of lying to a population to turn them against an ethnic group, right, and then getting everybody to participate in mass murder of that ethnic group. And, I think that generation learned their lesson because the world calmed down from 45 to, let's say, the 1960s. And by the time you get to the 60s, we're back at it again, and it's, and it's all over. My mother was a believer in this. She believed in this stuff. My mother marched in Mississippi, and she named me after Andrew Goodman, who was the Jewish white civil rights worker who went down in the 60s to fight for civil rights for blacks.
Burning.
And they made the movie about his life, his and another kid, Mississippi, and he was killed for it.
Right.
They killed him. And, that's a kind of horrible idea. I like to think that I have to carry that torch a little bit, not necessarily for civil rights per se, but for what we say in Judaism, tikkun olam, which means to heal the world. I'm responsible for being a part of the process to try and make things a little bit better. That's why I make these documentaries, or at least it's part of the reason I make these documentaries. Maybe I'd be better off making action films like, the Avengers, but
well, there's another saying that it is better to light one candle than curse the darkness. And when I watch a film like yours, I do see it as a candle in the darkness because, what you're laying out can be received as, the triumph of cynicism and manipulation. But it can also, I think, be empowering in the sense that if enough people get clued into the methodology that you reveal, then I would also like to think that, sure, maybe a degree of racism is inherent in a lot of folks, but I also believe a degree of pride is inherent. And them standing up and saying, we see what you're trying to do to us. We're not going to buy it. And I kind of have taken a little bit of that from the way communities have responded to some of these ICE crackdowns, where they were saying, you're taking away somebody who's been part of our community for years, contributed to our community as a taxpayer and maybe as an entrepreneur, et cetera, et cetera. And that person in the community was being viewed as an individual and not as a skin color. So maybe I'm being Pollyanna about it, but that's what I take away from the upside of your film.
I appreciate that, and thank you. Look, you got to keep up the fight. I have no trouble with Republicans winning if they fight a fair fight. The same for Democrats.
Absolutely.
I feel like this is unfair. And I'll say the other thing is, I'm a journalist, and so I'm very much a First Amendment guy. I also think that it's a distorted. I could love to have a conversation with you just about the First Amendment at some point, but I feel like they're taking away those rights from us too. And by the way, both parties are taking away our right to say what we want. The censorship is so ugly, right now. I mean, I feel like I'm more afraid of saying something right now that I'll offend my lefty friends. I'm afraid of talking, that they won't want to engage in a debate with me. They'll shut me down. Then my right-wing friends will at least yell back, but will not try to tell me I can't say it. But then the government is telling me that I can't say things. And how are they telling me I can't say things? By suing all the news organizations.
Right.
Because now news organizations don't want to show shows like mine.
Right.
But you know what? Hats off to PBS for having the cojones to show this, because you think that if I went to a Netflix or a Amazon, they're going to want to touch this. They're not going to want to go near this. They're all worried about regulatory stuff. Other people are worried about getting, broadcast licenses. I mean, it's a scary day for journalism. This film was just nominated for Best Documentary by the Writers Guild of America. It's a pretty high honor. We didn't win. There were only three that were picked as nominees. Usually there's 5 or 6. There are only 3, and we didn't win. But
congratulations on the nomination.
Yeah, thank you. Everybody who spoke on stage who was a journalist was, not everybody, but most of them talked about what an ugly time it is to be a journalist in this country because of how hard it is to be able to speak the truth of any kind.
Sure.
So
and yet it's, I feel this day in and day out, and yet it is the dogged, unheralded journalist, often vilified journalist, that is really that and a handful of judges that is serving as the bulwark against this authoritarian regime. Whether it's Julie Brown working in anonymity for years, uncovering the Epstein issue, or the reporter from the Times the other day that said to Trump, nobody in your administration is saying that school was hit by an Iranian missile. Why are you saying it? That was a journalist speaking truth to power.
We're the only ones. I mean, we're like the last line. Years ago, I did a film about the U.S. Army. I got to work with Walter Cronkite. I hired him to host it for me. I'll be honest. I wanted Walter to host it because he's a great name for the film, but I also just wanted to work with him.
Sure.
He was like 85 or something like that, and I thought, you don't get many chances like this. I wrote him a letter, and he wanted some absurd amount of money, and I was like, well, I have this tiny little baby amount of money, and he was like, okay, I'll do it. And the opening lines were, I wrote it for him, and he read it, which was nice. It's nice having Walter Cronkite read your lines,
No doubt.
And it was, for most of my life, I've been a journalist and a reporter, but I never could have had the job I did without a free press. And the free press is guaranteed by the Constitution. And then words to the effect, I don't remember the exact words, the Constitution is protected by our army, because that's why we get to be who we are, because we are a country based on an idea, and it is the soldier that keeps America safe. And I feel like that soldier has been turned against us by this administration. This is like the ICE thing. That's a physical manifestation, of this stuff, and then lying about what our armed forces do. Like our armed forces, if they bomb that school, they can take it. The armed forces can own up to it, but Trump doesn't want the bad approval rating for him, Sure. So, I've got a lot more respect for our armed forces than I do for politicians who are dishonest about them. So, but that's another, I'm going on a tangent. So.
Tangents are welcome. So your film is White with Fear. It will stream simultaneous to its broadcast on the 24th of March on PBS. So you can check it out during the broadcast on PBS or catch it at pbs.org and all of their station branded platforms. And I have been speaking with the writer, producer, and director, Andrew Goldberg. Andrew, your film it's eye-opening, it's instructive, it's thought-provoking, and I hope it provokes a lot of consideration and conversation. I really appreciate speaking with you and you making the time for this conversation.
It was a great interview. You did a really terrific job. Thank you, and thanks for the nice words about the film. They're a welcome and appreciated.
Take care.
Take care. Thanks.
I'm a white man living in a white man's world. Under our roof is a baby girl. I thought this world could be hers one day, but her mama knew better. I'm a white man living in a white man's town. Wanna take a shot of cocaine and burn it down. Mama wants to change that Nashville sound, but they're never gonna let her. There's no such thing as someone else's war. Your creature comforts aren't the only things worth I'm a white man living on a white man's street. I got the bones of the red man under my feet. The highway runs through the burial grounds, past the oceans of cotton.